A new Gallup poll out this week shows that 40% of Americans and 70% of Democrats support some kind of socialism. We just one election away from Atlas Shrugged. Hey everybody, I'm Steve Green, and this is Right Angle, brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com, and I am here, of course, with Bill Whittle and Scott Ott. Gentlemen, this survey just disturbed the heck out of me, because left and right, at least we didn't want to go full-bore Venezuela, despite our differences. But listen to this. Gallup survey showed 70% of Democrats supporting some form of socialism. I think we'll get to that in a minute. Just 25% of Democrats said some form of socialism would be, quote, a bad thing for the country as a whole. Among Republicans, 84, this is where I get my hope, 84% of respondents said that embracing some form of socialism would be bad for the U.S., and a plurality of independents, but only a plurality of independents, said that 48% said that socialism would be a bad thing. Scott, this makes me think that Barack Obama was wrong once again, and that there really are two Americas. How do you reconcile this?
Mostly through semantics. I think that
Okay.
there's nobody on the side that says a little more socialism would be a good thing or a lot more socialism would be a good thing. Nobody on that side thinks that what Venezuela is doing is socialism, qua socialism. I don't think
it still
that they
hasn't been tried.
Yeah, I don't think that they look at that and go, well, that's socialism, give me some of that action. I don't think they look at China or Vietnam or the former Soviet Union or any of the other socialist disasters all the way back to Nazi Germany. I don't think that they look at any of that and say, this is what we want. And I've said in a previous episode that I think there's a certain kind of racist nationalism that assumes that people in the United States can do something better than people everywhere else in the world. So we look at all the examples that have been tried, every single one of them has failed, and we say, we, Americans, because of something, I don't know what, because of our birthright, because of our predominant race, because it's funny that American exceptionalism lives on the progressive left only insofar as it comes in touch with the idea of socialist utopianism. And somehow they think that they can pull this off. It reminds me of an old Nora Ephron screenplay where this one character was constantly saying he's never going to leave his wife, and the other character would say, you're right, I know you're right. Unfortunately, the left has never come to that point where they realize socialism is never going to leave its wife, and its wife is disaster, economic collapse, and mass death.
That was the late, great Carrie Fisher in When Harry Met Sally, which my wife and I watch every year between Christmas and New Year's, because the big finish is set at New Year's. You know what they say, Bill, you can vote your way into socialism, but you've got to shoot your way out of it. We're seeing this in Venezuela now, where some of the left still regards this as a state that failed not because they were socialist, but because of evil American imperialism. But the fact remains that down in Venezuela, where they really did embrace socialism harder than any other country in Latin America, they ended up having to eat their pets and then the zoo animals, and the country is literally falling apart. How do you re-educate Americans? Do we need capitalist education camps?
The reason we have so many people in America deciding that they want some form of socialism is because the only place you can really want to live in a socialist society is when you live in a capitalist society wishing you were in a socialist society. People who live in socialist societies wish they lived in capitalist societies. And I think there's some measure of the truthfulness of these two competing claims if you look at the numbers of people and the lengths that they're willing to go to leave a capitalist system for a socialist one versus a socialist system for a capitalist one. Most of these kids here who talk about being socialists are in schools that cost $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year, and they're not willing to spend $600 on an airplane ticket to the capital of socialist fantasy, Sweden, and live there for a year. On the other hand, there are people who will strap their inner tubes to lounge chairs and take grandma and the baby and the wife and the kids, shove off from Cuba, go north, hope to get to Florida. So many times just drift out into the Gulf Stream and just slowly drown, die, or exposure, or watch your 4-year-old get eaten by sharks in order to come to a capitalist society from a socialist one. So if it turns out that socialist and capitalist societies aren't willing to put down a small portion of their ample income to go and live in a socialist country, and the people who do live in socialist countries are willing to risk their lives and the lives of everyone they love in order to come here, that's not just my opinion. That's a data set. No one ever got shot going over the Berlin Wall to get into East Germany, and nobody ever put them. Family of dentists shoved off from Fort Lauderdale heading south to get to the free health care. Never once, not one. It's literally, honest to God, 100,000 to 0. That's the score. The reason they want socialism is because they just think it's a nicer way of having things. But they have these conversations about having a nicer way of having things at Starbucks on iPhones over Verizon Wireless, and the idea that iPhone might cost $20,000-$30,000 if it weren't for the fact that Samsung was also trying to get a piece of that pie, just never seems to dawn on them. But I think Scott covered it and you covered it too. Of all the things about socialism that are the most mystifying and disturbing to me, by far, it's the mental gymnastics that you have to do to not see the body count. And when people say, well, we're going to do it different, it's like Scott said, well, we're Americans and we won't have all the mass murders or anything. The only real response is to say the reason socialism hasn't worked yet is because this is actually what I should have led off with. When somebody says socialism and conservatives say 100, 200 million people dead, socialists say they didn't do it right. And it just this split second occurred to me that that's a false statement. Of course they did it right. The people who were behind the socialist movement did it exactly right. They wanted power, they wanted prestige, they wanted to rule other people's lives, and they didn't give a damn about how individual people lived or died. So yes, they did it exactly right. Hugo Chavez did it exactly right. His daughter has $4.5 billion in a country that's starving to death. Fidel Castro did it right. He had a personal bank account of $900 million when he died. He did it exactly right. Lenin was a failed lawyer. Trotsky was an unemployed student. Stalin was a low-grade thug and murderer. And all of these guys used socialism to get what they wanted. And so that's how it's built. And it succeeds perfectly. The tyranny necessary to take stuff away from people who've worked for it and the amount of power that takes inevitably corrupts anybody. And I just saw the same meme you did a second ago there, Steve. It's the thing about socialism. You vote your way in and you shoot your way out.
Yeah, that's not much of a system. Folks, I wasn't kidding, at least not very much in the beginning when I said we might just be one election away from embracing socialism, because we saw what the Democrats did the last time they had both houses of Congress and the White House in 2009 to 2011. They pushed through major piece of legislation after major piece of legislation, and they didn't care that they would lose their majority in the next election in 2010, because they figured, what the hell, we're going to ratchet this effect to the left and we'll win over the long term. And I think they certainly have done a lot of that. I mean, we still can't get rid of Obamacare, and Dodd-Frank's pretty much locked in too. And today's Democrat Party makes the Democrat Party under Obama during those 2 years look practically moderate. It's frightening how much further that party has moved to the left in the last 10 years, and the Republican Party is pretty much where it's always been. We like tax cuts, we like deregulation, we like a strong military. You hear the Republicans have moved farther and farther to the right, and it just isn't true. The Democrats keep moving further and further to the left. And I know I've talked about this before, but there's this recurring theme in American science fiction of some self-inflicted calamity that befalls the nation, and we have to go through this cleansing purge, some horrible calamity. You see it in Atlas Shrugged with the total economic collapse of the country. It was in John Ringo's Centurion, where rapid global cooling kills off maybe 100 million Americans. But the survivors, they're tougher, they're freer, they're more independent-minded, and all the getting back to our roots. You even see it in The Walking Dead and so many other TV shows and books. Do we have to go through that? Do we have to go through one of these cleansing purges? I hope not. It would be horrible. And I look at the millennials and I think, maybe we do. But I look at Gen Z, like my boys coming up, 13 and 8, they say millennials, like Seinfeld says, Newman. And I saw a poll a year or two ago that Gen Z might be the most conservative generation in American history. So maybe these are the young folks who are going to correct this country and set us right without having to go through some horrible self-inflicted disaster. And if not, well, I'll see you at the zoo. And that's your right angle on that, brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. If you like programming like this, please click on over. Become a member. We'd love to have you as one of our producers. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.